The Monkees were dismissed as a fake band, but did you know they outsold the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined in 1967? Learn the truth behind their unexpected success. 20. The Temptations. Formed in Detroit in 1961, the Temptations were one of Motown's biggest acts. But what caused their harmonious rise to become a tale of tragic losses? The Temptations formed in Detroit in 1961 and were signed by Motown. The group consisted of Otis Williams, Melvin Franklin, Eddie Kendricks, Paul Williams, David Ruffin, and Dennis Edwards. The band quickly made waves with its perfectly balanced harmonies and soul sound and scored a number of hits including Ain't Too Proud to Beg, Get Ready, My Girl, Papa Was a Rollin' Stone, and I Wish It Would Rain. By the late 70s, some members of the Temptations were beginning to leave, and the band switched labels from Motown Records over to Atlantic while trying to shift their sound to appeal to the burgeoning disco craze. The group stayed together, though the lineup changed considerably over the 80s. In the early 90s, Cuffin, Hendrix, and Franklin all tragically died within a couple of years of each other. Today, Otis Williams, who owns the Temptations' name, still performs with a new lineup. 19. The Stooges.
Clock's ticking, not giving her room to breathe.
From Detroit obscurity to punk legends, the Stooges' journey was anything but straightforward. What led Iggy Pop's chaotic band to finally find their place in history? The Stooges initially made little impact outside of their native Detroit, Michigan, but their immense influence on future generations more than broke their inclusion among the best 60s bands. The result of legendary frontman Iggy Pop's desire to marry the different strands of the music he loved, the tough urban blues of Howlin' Wolf and John Lee Hooker, the no-nonsense anthemic thrust of garage rockers such as the Kinks and the Sonics. The Stooges' self-titled, John Cale-produced 1969 debut album effectively drew the blueprint for punk with its dirty, repetitive guitar riffs, nihilistic attitude, and desire to go out on a limb. These qualities ensured the album initially flew under the radar, but the Stooges and its follow-up, Funhouse, was later cited as an inspiration by artists as diverse as Alice Cooper, David Bowie, who co-produced the Stooges' third album, Raw Power, and would help launch Iggy Pop's solo career in the mid-70s, Sex Pistols, The Fall, and Joy Division. Indeed, the best Stooges songs remain seminal anthems of disaffected youth, with No Fun, I Wanna Be Your Dog, and Little Doll still causing nascent bands to make amps bleed to this day. 18. The Kinks. Initially seen as another British invasion act, the Kinks evolved into something far greater. How did their unique storytelling become a voice of the British working class? First breaking through in 1964 with aggressive R&B influenced rock hits such as All Day and All of the Night and the chart-topping You Really Got Me, the Kinks initially seemed like North London's answer to the Merseybeat craze instigated by the rise of the Beatles. However, after frontman Ray Davies developed his highly individual style of songwriting, the Kinks found their own voice and went from strength to strength. In parallel with a string of era-defining hits as dedicated follower of fashion, Sunny Afternoon, and the sublime Waterloo Sunset, the band released a string of terrific albums from 1966's Face to Face to 1969's Arthur, or The Decline and Fall of the British Empire, all of which were stuffed with brilliantly observed songs reflecting the British way of life both past and present. All the above served to cement the Kinks' reputation as one of the best 60s bands, though inspired further releases, including Lola vs. Powerman and the Money Go Round Part 1 and Muswell Hillbillies, ensured their imperial phase spilled over into the 70s. 17. The Doors. Jim Morrison Morrison's dark charisma and poetic lyrics made the Doors a sensation. But what were the cracks forming behind the scenes that led to their sudden end? In a 1968 interview with the New York Times, the Doors frontman Jim Morrison famously described his band as erotic politicians, and there's no doubt that the legendary Lizard King's sex appeal and photogenic good looks did his band's profile no harm whatsoever. Ultimately, though, the Doors were about more than one individual. Indeed, keyboardist Ray Manzarek, guitarist Robbie Krieger, and drummer John Densmore were responsible for the virtuosic, jazz-inflected psychedelic music that framed Jim Morrison's highly literate lyrics and gave the group their edge. Prior to Morrison's fatal final sojourn to Paris in 1971, the Doors racked up one of rock's most covetable catalogs, with all 6 of the original 4 Pieces studio albums, from their seminal self-titled debut album of 1967 through to their formidable swan song, 1971's LA Woman, providing numerous examples of the group's collective command of rock and roll at its most erudite, sensual, and inspirational. 16. The Vogues. Covering hits from other artists, the Vogues took traditional pop to new heights. But how did a high school group manage to climb the charts with soul and harmony? Originally called the Bel-Airs while still attending Turtle Creek High School, the Vogues came together after military service or college of several members. Steeped in traditional pop, they became a blue-eyed soul juggernaut. Most of the songs that hit for the Vogues were covers of previous hits. You're the One was a top 30 hit in the UK for Petula Clark, but the Vogues took it to number 4 in the US. Turn Around Look at Me was a hit for Glenn Campbell, the Letterman, and Bee Gees before the Vogues took it into the top 10. Bobby Helms had a gold record with My Special Angel in 1957. 11 years later, the Vogues revived it, taking the song to number 7 on Hot 100 and 2 weeks at number 1 on the easy listening charts. Their biggest hit, though, was one that they were the first to record. 5 O'Clock World hit number 1 status just 2 months after its release. 15. Iron Butterfly. Iron Butterfly's psychedelic sound was groundbreaking, but how did a 17-minute track accidentally turn them into legends? The story behind Inagata de Vida is a trip worth taking. The San Diego-based group formed in 1966 when Doug Ingle, Jack Pinney, Greg Willis, and Danny Weiss played together as the house band for a club called Palace. Within the early days of the band's formation, several of the founding members were swapped out for what would become the band's most well-known lineup, consisting of Doug Ingle, Ron Bushy, Lee Dorman, and Eric Brann. The band met its greatest success with its sophomore album, Inagata de Vida, a mishearing of In the Garden of Eden. The 17-minute title track was edited down for the radio, and that version became a hit. Though Iron Butterfly stopped releasing new music in 1975, the band still performs today. Some of the group's old members have died, including Ron Bushy and Philip Taylor Kramer. 14. Fleetwood Mac. Before Stevie Nicks and Rumors, Fleetwood Mac was a blues band. What led them to evolve from a British blues act into one of the biggest bands of the 70s? The later and better known incarnation of Fleetwood Mac, featuring Stevie Nicks and the much-missed Christine McVie, made its mark on the 70s and 80s thanks to the enduring quality of such multi-million selling blockbusters as Rumors and Tango in the Night. However, these colossal records shouldn't be allowed to obscure the fact that, in a rather different guise, Fleetwood Mac had already experienced the peaks and troughs of fame before becoming one of the best bands of the 70s. In the latter days of the 60s, the group was a rather different beast. Though still underpinned by the stalwart rhythm section of John McVie, bass, and Mick Fleetwood, drums, the Fleetwood Mac that made their live debut at the Windsor's National Jazz and Blues Festival in 1967 was primarily blues-based. This first in a long run of Fleetwood Mac lineups also featured two guitarists and composers, Jeremy Spencer and the group's prodigiously talented, if mercurial founder, Peter Green, with a third, Danny Kirwan, enlisting during 1968. Brilliant if volatile, this version of the group nonetheless made albums, their self-titled debut, 1968's Mr. Wonderful, and 1969's Then Play On, and classic singles, Man of the World, the blissful chart-topping instrumental Albatross, Green's sinister The Green Manalishi with the two-prong crown, which secured their reputation as one of the best 60s bands long before Green quit in May 1970. 13. The Beach Boys. They were America's answer to the Beatles, but behind the Beach Boys' sunny sound lay dark stories of family strife, mental illness, and tragic loss. What went wrong? The Beach Boys was a family band made up of brothers Brian, Dennis, and Carl Wilson, their cousin Mike Love, and friend and neighbor Al Jardine. The band began in 1961 when Dennis and Mike went fishing and decided to try their hand at writing a song about surfing. Soon after, the group created a demo of two original songs, gained popularity in Southern California, and was later signed by Capitol Records. The Beach Boys' momentum continued when they were tapped to help promote the release of Mattel's Barbie dolls by singing the song Barbie. Their rise was cemented with the 1966 album Pet Sounds. Though the Beach Boys continued playing into the 70s, fractures began to form when substance use, mental health issues, and family betrayals and rivalries became more dominant in the lives of the band members. Brian and Mike's contentious relationships, as well as Dennis's association with the Manson family and eventual death by drowning in 1983, put an end to the band known for its happy-go-lucky sound and soaring harmonies. Carl Wilson died in 1998 of lung cancer. 12. The Blues Magoos. One-hit wonders or pioneers of the psychedelic sound. The Blues Magoos briefly shined with their hit We Ain't Got Nothing Yet, but what happened after the lights went out? An American rock group from the Bronx, they were on the forefront of the psychedelic music scene. In 1966, they released their only hit song, We Ain't Got Nothing Yet, on the Mercury label. The song went to number 5 on the charts and scored the band a tour the following year, opening for The Who and Herman's Hermits. You heard that right, Herman's Hermits were the headlining act. Two members of the group went on to bigger and better things. Eric Kaz has written hit songs for Linda Ronstadt, Bonnie Raitt, Kim Carnes, George Strait, and many others. Joey Steck is a successful musician, songwriter, and founder of Sonic Past Music. 11. The Amen Corner.
It's a crowded place that's filled with people all alone.
From Cardiff's local dance scene to the UK charts, the Amen Corner had a wild ride. But what drove them to break up at the peak of their success? In the mid-1960s, the Amen Corner was a weekly disc-spinning party at the Victoria Ballroom in Cardiff, Wales. On Sunday nights, a DJ known as Dr. Rock would play the hottest soul music from the United States. That was the inspiration for the Amen Corner, the band. All their hits were on the UK charts, but several got radio play in the US as well. Their first hit, Gin House Blues, was a cover of Me and My Gin, recorded by Bessie Smith in 1928. Other hits included Bend Me, Shape Me, originally released by The Outsiders and The American Breed, and If Paradise Is Half as Nice, which was their only number 1. Upon their breakup, members of the group joined Fairweather, Mott the Hoople, Bee Gees, and Eric Clapton. 10. Edwin Starr.
Hear me saying, it's a family affair. It's a family affair.
Known Known for the iconic protest anthem War, Edwin Starr's career spanned far more than just one hit. But what's the untold story of his rise and fall? Nashville native Edwin Starr is best known as the Motown soul man whose biggest hit, War, came in 1970. Prior to that release, he had several pop and R&B hits including Agent 00 Soul, Stop Her on Sight, SOS, I'm Still a Struggling Man, and 25 Miles. Beginning his career with the doo-wop group The Future Tones, he soon began recording for a small label in Detroit, Rick Tick. Starr was one of the main reasons why Berry Gordy purchased the label in 1968, melding it into his Motown powerhouse. Many of Starr's Rick Tick songs, such as Backstreet and Headline News, became Northern Soul classics once they fell under the Motown umbrella. 9. The Human Beings. With a sound as rebellious as their name, the Human Beings defied convention with their garage rock anthem, Nobody But Me. But did you know they only had one real hit? A garage rock band from Struthers, Ohio, the Human Beings may be one of those bands that would be easy to forget, except that their only hit song, Nobody But Me, will forever be a musical trivia category. The song went to number 8 on the charts in 1968, having been written and previously recorded by the Isley Brothers. The recording's two 31-fold repetitions of the word no fulfill Casey Kasem's Book of Records category of most repetitive word or phrase in a Hot 100 Top 10 hit, besting the 26-fold repetition of I Know in Bill Withers' Ain't No Sunshine. Their only other song to make international waves was the cover of Bobby Blue Bland's Turn On Your Love Light. It barely broke the top 100 in the US, but got all the way to number 1 in Japan. Originally known as the Premiers, the band initially featured John Richard Dick Belly, vocals guitar, Joe Ting Marcolin, vocals guitar, Mel Pachuta, vocals bass, and Gary Coates, drums, later replaced by Mike Tatman. The Beans started in 1964 as the Premiers, launching their professional career to build a local fan base. In 1966, they changed their name to the Human Beings because they felt their old name did not fit with the feel of the late 60s. They recorded covers of songs by Them, The Yardbirds, The Who, and Bob Dylan. The group was also the first to record a cover of Gloria by Them, which became a hit for The Shadows of Night, and covered the Pied Piper, which later became a hit for Crispy and St. Peter's. 8. The Who. With anthems like My Generation, The Who became the voice of a rebellious youth. But how did their explosive start evolve into rock operas and shattered guitars? Ray Davies wasn't the only ambitious young London-based singer-songwriter to emerge in the aftermath of the initial British invasion of 1964 and 65. Indeed, to the southwest of Davies' Muswell Hill Manor in Shepherd's Bush, The Who's Pete Townshend, then barely pushing 20, had already written several of his band's career-defining songs, among them I Can't Explain and My Generation. Like the Kinks, The Who also drew upon R&B and soul influences. Yet while they will forever be associated with the 60s mod movement, Townshend and his team developed on their own terms. Classic and often provocative singles such as the blistering I Can See for Miles and the masturbation-related Pictures of Lily served notice of Townshend's intent. But it was the transatlantic top 5 success of The Who's fourth album, the audacious double-disc rock opera Tommy, which forever set in stone The Who's reputation as one of the best 60s bands. 7. The Ronettes. The Ronettes gave us some of the most iconic girl group songs of all time, but their rapid rise was matched by an even more dramatic fall. What went wrong? Suffice it to say that the Ronettes were one of the key girl groups of the 1963-64 period, turning out a series of hit songs that helped define that era including Be My Baby of October 1963, one of the key genre-defining girl group songs. Added to the National Recording Registry at the Library of Congress in 2006, Be My Baby's description in that listing reads, "This single is often cited as the quintessence of the girl group aesthetic of the early 1960s and is also one of the best examples of producer Phil Spector's wall of sound style." Opening with Hal Blaine's infectious and much imitated drum beat, distinctive features of the song, all carefully organized by Spector, include castanets, a horn section, strings, and the able vocals of Veronica Ronnie Bennett. Enhancing the already symphonic quality of the recording is Spector's signature use of reverb. The Ronettes were formed in 1959 by sisters Ronnie Bennett, by name of Veronica Bennett, later Ronnie Spector, born August 10, 1943, New York City, died January 12, 2022, Danbury, Connecticut, and Estelle Bennett, born July 22, 1941, New York City, died February 11, 2009, Englewood, New Jersey, with their cousin Nedra Talley, born January 27, 1946, New York City. The group started as a song and dance act at the Peppermint Lounge in New York City, with Ronnie taking lead vocals and Estelle and Nedra singing backup. They were discovered by Don Kirshner, who signed them to his Colpix label. As Ronnie and the Relatives, they recorded a number of singles, but none of them reached the national charts. In 1963, the group, now called the Ronettes, teamed with producer Phil Spector, who reshaped their image, incorporating the beehive hairdos that soon became characteristic of the girl group genre, and applied his dense wall of sound production style to the trio's music. The first single produced by Spector, Be My Baby, was a wall of sound masterpiece, and it was one of the first 5 Ronettes songs to reach the top 40 in 63-64. This marked the peak of the group's success, however, and the Ronettes disbanded in 1966. 6. Garnett Mims. Garnett Mims was the voice behind Crybaby, the soulful hit that inspired countless covers. But how did this group, the Enchanters, end up fading into the background? Mims first made his mark in music as leader of Garnett, Mims and the Enchanters, which he formed with Sam Bell, Charles Boyer, and Zola Purnell in Philadelphia in 1961. With Mims at the helm, the group released 8 charting singles in 2 years, including A Quiet Place, Baby Don't You Weep, and their biggest hit, Crybaby, which was also a later hit for Janis Joplin. Mims left the Enchanters in 1964 and had several minor hits afterward, including A Little Bit of Soap, It's Been Such a Long Way Home, and I'll Take Good Care of You. Many of these songs became standards in the British Northern Soul scene. Mims toured with Jimi Hendrix and had Led Zeppelin perform his song As Long As I Have You extensively in the late 60s. 5. The Monkees. Criticized as a manufactured band, the Monkees still sold millions of records. But was their success purely down to TV fame, or was there real talent beneath the surface? The 75 million records they sold worldwide means that, based on their commercial yield alone, the Monkees deserve to be rated among the best 60s bands. Yet the US quartet had to fight for their credibility. Effectively, one of the music industry's first manufactured bands, the 4 group members, Davy Jones, Mike Nesmith, Peter Tork, and Mickey Dolenz, were brought together in 1966 to star in the NBC sitcom The Monkees, and the songs they recorded were initially provided by such brill-building songwriters as Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart under the auspices of Don Kirshner, head of the group's record label, Coal Gems. Controlled by Kirshner and featuring the cream of the era's LA-based session musicians, the Monkees' initial releases, the singles Last Train to Clarksville and the Neil Diamond-penned I'm a Believer, as well as the albums The Monkees and More of the Monkees, all topped the US charts, though the band members would eventually gain some control of their music, recording self-penned material on their acclaimed third album, Headquarters. The Monkees' popularity waned after their TV show was canceled in 1968, but they secured their legacy with the release of their wonderfully satirical left-field movie, Head, a cult classic written and produced by Bob Rafelson and a pre-famed Jack Nicholson. 4. Sly and the Family Stone. The first major American rock band to feature a racially integrated mixed-gender lineup, Sly and the Family Stone changed the game. But how did internal turmoil overshadow their innovation? Led by the brilliant if unpredictable Texan-born Sylvester Stewart, aka Sly Stone, San Francisco's Sly and the Family Stone are unquestionably one of the most groundbreaking outfits among the best 60s bands. The first major American rock act to feature a racially integrated mixed-gender lineup, they formed late in 1966 and pioneered a potent psychedelic soul sound all their own, blending elements of soul, funk, R&B, rock, and psychedelia. Regulars in the top 10 of the Billboard Hot 100 during the late 60s, with evergreen hits such as Dance to the Music, Everyday People, and Thank You, the Family Stone also released critically acclaimed albums such as Life and 1969's excellent Stand, which married hard-hitting social commentary with a dynamic pop sensibility. Arguably one of the biggest bands in the US by the end of the decade, they played rapturously received shows at both the Harlem Cultural Festival and at Woodstock during the summer of 1969, and retained their popularity during the early 70s thanks to further landmark releases such as 1971's There's a Riot Going On and 1973's Fresh. 3. The Jimi Hendrix Experience. Jimi Hendrix's guitar genius is undisputed, but what made his band The Experience so special? And why did their meteoric rise come to such a tragic end? Jimi Hendrix was so prodigiously talented that it's tempting to say he would have been a superstar regardless of who he played with. However, all the best 60s bands required a special chemistry to make such a seismic impact. And in that respect, the Jimi Hendrix Experience was no exception. They had a head start with the charismatic and virtuosic Hendrix out front, but it's unlikely their music would have taken off so quickly without the help of jazz octopus Mitch Mitchell on drums and the underrated Noel Redding playing the crucial anchor role on bass. Indeed, it was their almost supernatural understanding of each other that allowed the three musicians to cut their classic early singles, Hey Joe, Purple Haze, The Wind Cries Mary, and their landmark first two albums, Are You Experienced and Axis Bold as Love, in just a matter of days. With hindsight, it's also telling that Hendrix struggled to make things gel with both the expanded band he later employed at Woodstock and with his short-lived Band of Gypsies project. He assembled a new lineup of The Experience with a returning Mitchell and Billy Cox replacing Redding during the final 6 months of his tragically short life. 2. The Beach Boys, Reprise. Few bands embodied the carefree spirit of the 60s like the Beach Boys, but their internal battles were anything but harmonious. What ultimately tore America's band apart? Due to the fact they already had a strong identity and a string of hits to their name, Surfin' USA, Surfer Girl, and Fun 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 among them, the Beach Boys were one of the few homegrown US acts able to retain their commercial foothold during the British invasion. However, while their songs had thus far reflected Californian youth culture's love of surfing, cars, and romance, the group proved they were in it for the long haul with 1965's The Beach Boys Today, a mature, orchestrated work which reflected the ambition of the band's visionary sonic architect, Brian Wilson. Indeed, Wilson was on a roll creatively with the Beach Boys' next release, May 1966's audacious widescreen Pet Sounds, widely regarded as his band's masterpiece. The album contains many of the Beach Boys' best-loved songs, Wouldn't It Be Nice, Caroline No, God Only Knows, and it's now widely regarded as one of the greatest pop albums of all time. However, Wilson was stung by Pet Sounds' lukewarm reception in the US. It peaked at number 10. and his declining mental health forced him to relinquish much of his control over the Beach Boys' creative decisions. Despite further critical success with early 70s albums such as Sunflower and Surf's Up, the group would never again hit such heights. But with sales of over 100 million records worldwide, their inclusion among the best 60s bands is mandatory. 1. The Mindbenders. We first knew them as Wayne Fontana's backing group, but the Mindbenders came into their own with A Groovy Kind of Love. How did they end up disappearing so quickly? We first heard them in the spring of 1965 as Wayne Fontana's backing group on the #1 stomper, Game of Love. A bit of silence ensued after that, and then a year later, here they were again, with no Wayne Fontana in sight. A Groovy Kind of Love, as its title suggests, was a gentler song penned by Carol Bayer Sager and Tony Wine, rich in harmonies and a groovy lead guitar solo by one Eric Stewart, who would resurface in the early 70s with future Mindbender and ace songwriter Graham Gouldman as the movers and shakers behind 10cc. A Groovy Kind of Love just missed the top spot, settling at #2 in the spring of '66. No worries though, 22 years later, Phil Collins took his version to #1. The Mindbenders were an English beat group from Manchester. Originally the backing group for Wayne Fontana, they were one of several acts that were successful in the mid-60s British invasion of the US charts. The Mindbenders appeared in the 1967 Sidney Poitier movie To Sir With Love and were also on the soundtrack with the songs Off and Running, the last Bayer Wine song recorded by the band, and It's Getting Harder All the Time. Shortly thereafter, Rothwell quit the band and was replaced by Paul Hancox. Graham Gouldman became the band's producer around this time. Future Led Zeppelin bassist John Paul Jones was also involved in arranging their records in '67-68. Later in 1967, the Mindbenders released their cover version of The Letter, which fell short at #42 in the UK singles chart, the last time the Mindbenders registered a single in the UK charts, whilst the Box Tops originally reached the UK top 10. A couple more flops followed, and in March 1968, Lane quit and was replaced by Graham Gouldman. With Gouldman on bass, but with Rick Dixon producing, the band recorded Gouldman's composition Uncle Joe the Ice Cream Man as their final single. On November 20th, 1968, the Mindbenders broke up at the final concert of a UK tour with The Who, Arthur Brown, and Joe Cocker. Thanks for watching. If you love this deep dive into forgotten bands, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out our other videos on iconic music history and uncover more hidden gems. See you in the next one.